The cassette tape sat in a shoebox in Willie Parker's attic in New Orleans for 32 years. Willie had died in 2003, and his daughter Regina was clearing out the house, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep and what to discard. The shoebox was labeled in her father's handwriting, "Private, do not open until I'm gone." Inside, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was a single cassette tape with a piece of paper taped to it. The paper said, July 6, 1971, 4:30 a.m. Louis called. "This is our last conversation. He died 2 hours later. I recorded it because I knew it was important. Nobody else needs to hear this while I'm alive, but after I'm gone, maybe someone should know what he said when he knew he was dying." Willie. Regina held the cassette with trembling hands, trying to process what she was reading. Louis Armstrong had called her father the morning he died, and her father had recorded it, and never told anyone. She found an old cassette player in the garage, loaded the tape, pressed play, and heard a voice she recognized from old records, weak and tired, but unmistakable, saying, "Willie? It's Louis. I don't have much time." July 6th, 1971, 4:30 in the morning. Louis Armstrong sat in the kitchen of his home in Corona, Queens, the house dark except for the small light over the stove. His wife, Lucille, was asleep upstairs. Louis had woken 2 hours earlier knowing, with the certainty that sometimes comes at the end, that this was his final day. His heart was failing. His body was shutting down. The pain was constant now, beyond what medicine could manage. He had maybe hours left, possibly less. And in the strange clarity that approaching death can bring, Louis found himself thinking not about his career, not about the music, not about fame or legacy, but about Willie Parker. Willie, who had been his best friend when they were boys in New Orleans, running wild through the battlefield district in the early 1900s. Willie, who had taught Louis how to steal coal from the railway yard to keep warm in winter. Willie, who had been there the night Louis first held a cornet. Willie, who Louis had not spoken to in 50 years, not because of any argument or falling out, but simply because their lives had diverged so completely that maintaining connection became impossible. Willie had stayed in New Orleans, worked on the docks his whole life, never left the neighborhood where they had grown up. Louis had left and become Louis Armstrong, a name known around the world. And now, dying, Louis needed to talk to Willie one more time. Louis picked up the kitchen phone and dialed a number he had looked up the previous day, knowing even then what was coming. The phone rang 6 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Oh." Willie Parker, now 71 years old, had been asleep in his small house in the Treem neighborhood. "Willie, Iseda. It's Louis." There was a long silence. Then, "Louis? Louis Armstrong." "Yeah, Willie. It's me." Another silence, longer this time. Willie was trying to process why Louis Armstrong would be calling him at 4:30 in the morning after 50 years of silence. "Louis, you all right? What time is it?" Louis's voice was quiet, tired. "Willie, I'm dying. Today, I think. Maybe in a couple hours. I needed to talk to you before I go." Willie sat up in bed, fully awake now, his heart pounding. "Jesus, Louis. Where you at? You need help? You want me to call someone?" "No, Willie. I got people here. Lucille's upstairs. Doctor's been coming every day. Ain't nothing nobody can do now. I needed to talk to you. About before. About when we were kids. About things I never got to say." Willie Parker got out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake his wife, Denise. He carried the phone into the kitchen, its long cord stretching from the bedroom. He had a small cassette recorder on the counter, one he used to record sermons from church so Denise could listen when she was sick and could not attend. Something made Willie press record before he continued the conversation. Maybe he knew this was historic. Maybe he just knew it was important and wanted to remember. Whatever the reason, he captured the next 47 minutes of conversation, the last substantial words Louis Armstrong would speak before his death. "Louis, man, I don't even know what to say. 50 years, and you calling me now? Louis's voice carried a weight of regret and urgency. Ah, I know, Willie. I know. But listen to me. I got things I need to tell somebody who knew me before I was Louis Armstrong. Before the trumpet, before the fame, before all of it. You, the only person left who remembers Louis the Kid, not Louis the Entertainer. And I need to talk to that person. I need to remember who I was before I became what I became. For the next 3/4 of an hour, two old men who had once been boys together in the poorest, most dangerous neighborhood in New Orleans talked about the past, about choices made and paths taken, about what had been gained and what had been lost. Louis talked about their childhood with a specificity and emotion he had never shown in any interview or biography. He talked about being hungry, truly hungry, not knowing where the next meal would come from. About the fear that was constant in the battlefield, the violence they witnessed, the friends who died young. You remember Sonny? Sonny Williams? Louis asked. Got killed over nothing when we was 14. Remember how we cried? Willie remembered. They had both cried that day, two boys learning that death was random and close. Louis continued, his voice getting softer. I think about Sonny sometimes. Think about how he never got old. Never got a chance. And I got all this, Willie. Got famous, got money, got to see the whole world. And I don't know if I deserved it more than Sonny did. Don't know if I was better or smarter or more talented. I just got lucky. Got out. And he didn't. Louis talked about the moment their lives diverged, the day he left New Orleans for Chicago in 1922. I remember saying goodbye to you, Willie, down at the train station. You helped me carry my horn. And you said something I never forgot. You said, don't forget where you're from. And I tried, Willie. I tried to remember. But you know what happens? You get famous, and everyone wants a piece of you. Everyone wants you to be something. And to survive it, you got to become what they want. You got to perform all the time, even when you're not on stage. And somewhere in all that performing, the real you gets buried so deep you forget what it was. I forgot, Willie. I forgot who I was before I was famous. And that's the thing I can't get back. That's the thing I lost. Willie listened, occasionally responding, but mostly just letting Louis talk. He understood that Louis was not looking for absolution or validation. He was simply unburdening himself to someone who had known him when he was nobody, someone who had no investment in Louis Armstrong the icon and could simply listen to Louis Armstrong the man. Louis talked about fame in ways he had never discussed publicly. People think being famous is all good, Willie. They think it's just applause and money and people loving you. But it's lonely, man. It's so lonely. Because they don't love you. They love what you represent. They love the music, the smile, the entertainment. But they don't know you. And after a while, you don't know yourself either. You become the performance. And the real you, the kid who ran through New Orleans streets with his best friend, that kid disappears. The conversation turned to music, but not in the way Louis usually discussed it. He talked about it as both salvation and prison. The trumpet saved my life, Willie. You know that. Gave me a way out. Gave me a purpose. Gave me everything I got. But it also trapped me. Because once you're known for something, that's all people want from you. They want the trumpet, the music, the joy. They don't want to know about the pain or the fear or the loneliness. So you keep performing, keep giving them what they want, and you bury everything else. And after 50 years of that, Willie, I'm tired. I'm so tired of performing. Even my smile became part of the performance. You know that? My famous smile. Now, people think it's real. And it was, once. When I was a kid playing for the first time, that joy was real. But somewhere along the way, it became something I did because people expected it. And I don't even know anymore which smiles were real and which were performance. Willie asked a question that cut to the heart of everything. Louis, if you could go back and choose different, would you? There was a long pause. Then Louis answered with painful honesty. I don't know, Willie. Part of me says yes because the cost was so high. Lost my real self, lost touch with people like you who knew me before, lost the ability to just be Louis without it being a performance. But I also gave people something real, even if I had to fake parts of it. The music was real. The joy I gave people, even if my own joy was complicated, that was real to them. So maybe it was worth it? I don't know. I'm dying, and I still don't know. The vulnerability in that admission was striking. Here was a man who had achieved everything by conventional measures, who was beloved by millions, who had changed the course of American music. And he was confessing that he was not sure if it had been worth the cost. Louis talked about regrets, and the biggest one surprised Willie. My biggest regret ain't about music or career or any of that, Willie. My biggest regret is I stopped being real with people I loved. I stopped being real with you. We were brothers, man. Closer than brothers. And I let that go because I got famous and didn't know how to maintain real relationships, when everyone saw me as Louis Armstrong instead of just Louis. I should have called you. Should have visited. Should have kept you in my life. But I didn't, and I can't get those 50 years back. And now I'm about to die, and this is the only real conversation I've had in I don't know how long. That's the tragedy, Willie. Not that I'm dying, but that I waited until I was dying to be real again. Willie, crying now, told Louis something he needed to hear. Louis, man, you gave the world something beautiful. You gave people joy when they needed it. That matters. That's real too. Louis's response was quiet but profound. Maybe. But I wonder sometimes if I could have done that and still kept myself. If I could have been famous and real at the same time. Other people do it. But I didn't know how. I chose performance over authenticity. And I lived with that choice. But I want you to know, Willie, in case I never told you enough, you were real to me. The friendship we had, that was real. And I'm sorry I didn't honor it better. I'm sorry I let the performance take over everything. As the conversation neared its end, Louis's voice was getting weaker. He was exhausted, running on fumes. But there was one more thing he needed to say. Willie, when I die, there's going to be tributes and funerals and people talking about my legacy and my music and all that. And that's fine. But I want you to remember something different. Remember the kid who stole coal with you. Remember the kid who was scared and hungry and didn't know what he'd become. Remember Louis before Louis Armstrong Tata. Because that kid was real, Willie. That kid was true. And everything that came after, all the fame and success, it was built on top of that kid. But it also buried him. And I want someone to remember that he existed. You're the only one left who does. So remember for me, okay? Willie promised he would. And then Louis said, I got to go now, Willie. Got to rest. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you for being the one person I could be real with at the end. Willie, unable to speak through his tears, managed to say, I love you, Louis. Always did. Louis's final words on the recording were, love you too, Willie. Take care of yourself. And don't wait until you're dying to tell people what they mean to you. That's my last advice. Don't wait. The line went quiet. The call ended. Louis Armstrong went back upstairs, climbed into bed beside Lucille, and died approximately 2 hours later, around 7 in the morning. Willie Parker hung up the phone and sat in his kitchen as the sun rose, processing what had just happened. His best friend from childhood, who had become one of the most famous people in the world, had called him in his final hours to confess his loneliness, his regrets, his loss of self. Willie understood that this was important, that the conversation contained truths about Louis Armstrong that the public would never know from interviews or biographies. So he kept the cassette tape, but he also kept it private. This was not his story to tell while he was alive. This was Louis's final confession, and Willie would honor it by keeping it secret until he too was gone. For 32 years, the tape sat in Willie's attic. Willie never told anyone about the call except his wife Denise, and only in the most general terms. He said, Louis had called, they had talked, and Louis had died shortly after. He did not share the content, did not describe the depth of what Louis had revealed. When Willie died in 23, he left instructions that the tape should be found and shared only after his death. He wanted to protect Louis's privacy as long as he could, but he also believed the conversation deserved to be heard eventually, because it revealed something important about the cost of fame and the value of authenticity. When Regina Parker found the tape in 23 and listened to it, she was overwhelmed. She contacted the Louis Armstrong House Museum, unsure what to do with such intimate material. The museum director, Michael Cogswell, authenticated the tape through voice analysis and by verifying Willie Parker's connection to Armstrong through historical records. The conversation matched details of Armstrong's life that only someone who knew him as a child would know. It was genuine. The museum faced a difficult decision. Should they make the tape public? It was incredibly intimate, revealing vulnerabilities Armstrong had never shown publicly. But it also provided profound insight into the psychological cost of his fame and the complexity of his life. After consulting with Armstrong scholars and ethicists, the museum decided to release selected excerpts in 2005, with full transcripts available to researchers. The public response was remarkable. People were not shocked or disillusioned. Instead, they were moved by Armstrong's honesty, his self-awareness, his willingness to admit that fame had come at a tremendous personal cost. The tape humanized him in ways that burnished, rather than tarnished, his legacy. It showed that he understood the compromises he had made, that he had thought deeply about authenticity and performance, that behind the joyful entertainer was a man who struggled with the same questions about identity and meaning that everyone struggles with. Jazz musicians and scholars found the tape revelatory. Armstrong's admission that even his famous smile had become performance, that he had lost touch with his authentic self in the process of becoming famous, resonated with performers who understood that pressure. The tape became required listening in courses on celebrity, performance, and the psychology of fame. It prompted discussions about whether artists can maintain authenticity while achieving mass appeal, whether fame necessarily requires performing a version of yourself rather than being yourself, whether the cost Armstrong described was inevitable, or whether there were ways to achieve success without sacrificing the real self. The tape also changed how people understood Armstrong's final day. The conventional narrative had been that he died peacefully in his sleep after a long illness. That was true, but incomplete. Before he died, he had spent 47 minutes on the phone with someone from his past, confessing his regrets and revealing his deepest fears. He had ended his life with an act of radical honesty, stripping away the performance one final time to connect with someone who had known him before he became a commodity. That final act of authenticity gave his death a different meaning, suggesting that at the end, what mattered most to him was not the legacy or the fame, but the authentic connections he had lost along the way. Willie Parker's decision to record the conversation and preserve it proved prophetic. Without that tape, Louis Armstrong's final thoughts would have died with him. His public legacy would have remained intact, but incomplete, missing the self-awareness and vulnerability that made him fully human. The tape filled in a crucial piece of the story, showing that Armstrong understood exactly what he had traded for success, and that he carried that knowledge with him to the end. It did not diminish his achievements. It contextualized them, adding depth and tragedy to the triumphant narrative. Today, excerpts from the tape are played at the Louis Armstrong House Museum as part of an exhibit on fame and authenticity. Visitors can hear Louis's voice, weak but clear, talking about loneliness and performance and the loss of self. Many visitors cry, some because they hear their own struggles with authenticity in Armstrong's words, some because they realize that even the most successful beloved people carry burdens they never show, some simply because the honesty is so raw and undefended that it breaks through the usual barriers between performer and audience. The tape is Armstrong's final performance, but this time, there is no performance in it. Just truth, spoken to the one person who could receive it without judgment or expectation. The legacy of the tape continues to evolve. In an age of social media and constant self-presentation, Armstrong's warning about losing yourself in performance resonates with new urgency. His description of becoming the role people expect you to play speaks to anyone who has ever felt the pressure to present a curated version of themselves rather than their authentic self. The tape is not just about Louis Armstrong or about jazz or about fame. It is about the universal human struggle to be known truly while also being acceptable to the world. Armstrong's tragedy was that he found those two things incompatible and chose acceptability. His final gift was admitting that choice and its cost, so that others might navigate that tension with more awareness and perhaps more success. Willie Parker never achieved fame or fortune. He worked on the New Orleans docks for 45 years, raised a family, lived in the same neighborhood where he had grown up with Louis. By conventional measures, his life was ordinary. But in the final hours of Louis Armstrong's life, Willie's ordinariness became extraordinary. He was the keeper of Louis's true self, the repository of memories from before fame corrupted authenticity. He was the person Louis could be real with because Willie had never needed Louis to be anything other than what he was. That made Willie, in Louis's final assessment, more important than all the audiences, all the accolades, all the success. Because Willie represented what Louis had lost and what he realized, too late, had mattered most. Authentic human connection, untainted by performance or expectation. The cassette tape sits now in climate-controlled storage at the Louis Armstrong House Museum, a fragile artifact containing one of the most honest conversations ever recorded between two people. It has been digitally preserved, transcribed, studied, analyzed. But beyond its scholarly value, it remains what it was on that July morning in 1971. Two old friends talking about what really mattered, one of them dying, both of them trying to understand a life that had been extraordinary in its success and tragic in its cost. Louis Armstrong gave the world joy through his music. And in his final hours, he gave one friend the truth about what that joy had cost him. Both gifts matter. Both reveal something essential about art, fame, and the human need to be known as we truly are. The phone call that nobody was supposed to hear became the most important thing Louis Armstrong never performed. It was just Louis being real, one last time.